The music industry reached a low point when 75-year-old Waltz, Master André Rieu, passed away during a performance. Then everything was different. However, what led to his disintegration at the height of his abilities? We must know what transpired in his life in order to comprehend. Born on October 1st, 1949, André Rieu was raised in a household where following the rules took precedence over the well-being of the children. His father was a horrible dictator on stage, and he was the third of 6 children. In the world of orchestras, his father, André, was a renowned and esteemed director. At home, however, his children feared him. In their home, no one sang or laughed. Love was cold and nebulous. André would later add, "My parents didn't love me." He would say this quietly and honestly, without intending to offend anyone. His mother was obsessed about grades and abilities. Fantasy, she believed, was a horrible thing. It was shouted back at him through the house like a charge when his art teacher gave it acclaim. The impulse to be creative was not a sign of strength, but of weakness. When he was 5, things started to shift for him. He was taken in by a thin, elegant 18-year-old girl. She was his first piano instructor. She didn't reprimand him. She made him feel. In the sweep of her bow, young André experienced a freedom he had never experienced before. There was no romance or love. All that was audible was a vibration that sounded alive. He was certainly astonished. He then developed an interest in music. That enchanted attraction. It wasn't a victory. It marked the start of something that would develop within him. He pursued resonance while other children concentrated on scales. However, there was a cost to contentment. When he was in his teens, his father's strictness clashed with his developing love of waltzes. His bold lyrics made those at home laugh. His father screamed, "I didn't teach you how to play waltzes." Not only did those remarks criticize his style, their goal was to destroy his soul. Marjorie's arrival in 1968 was the final nail in his coffin. She was André's chosen buddy, not a conductor's score. When his mother saw her, she became very irate. "Leave," she instructed. One rejection followed by another. André departed that same evening. He didn't return. Their home remained vacant and unoccupied while he rose to fame. He never had his parents attend any of his performances. He couldn't shake the memory of the silence at home, despite the stadiums being packed with yelling supporters. "I spent years in therapy trying to understand why my childhood felt so hollow," he once stated to me. That room was never filled with cheers, but he felt seen at last through music. There was more to the violin than just an instrument. I was saved by it. When he played, the window would open. André broke away and started the rebellion in 1978, after years of listening to the empty echoes of performance halls and formal orchestral testing. The 12 dreamers who made up the Mastery Salon Orchestra lacked costumes but were full of optimism. These youthful aspirations were performing in backyard parties, little community halls, and forgotten border towns. Simply because it was music, it was played. There will only be sound, sharing, and people, no reviewers or large stages. All of that was outside. However, there was another person in charge of everything on the inside. Josie was present. She was invisible, steady, and accurate. She handled bookings, business meetings, and ghostwriter arrangements. She was the invisible force that enabled his magic to function. "Sell more records." She said this in jest when he wasn't sure if he wanted to purchase a dilapidated property, not because she was interested in him, but rather to secure the future. There was no TV coverage of this nonviolent uprising. It escaped. In 1987, he formally founded the Johann Strauss Orchestra, 12 musicians, but a daring mission to revive the pulse of music. They abandoned formality and seriousness. They appeared content because of the color of their clothing rather than the black tailcoats. On January 1st, 1988, they made a thrilling debut with dancing lights and humorous music. The audiences adored them despite the fact that reviewers made fun of them. They had no intention of attending a show. The music was reclaimed. One of the largest stages in Europe, the UEFA Champions League final in Vienna, saw a dramatic shift by 1995. When Rieu and his orchestra took the stage, they were playing Szykowicz's Waltz new. Football fans halted, shifted, and applauded. The stadium appeared to be on fire. Strain reduced the tension of sports. When Ajax scored, it seemed like the end of the world. The incident was recorded in history. Strauss and his band immediately shot to the top of the Dutch charts, where they remained for 19 weeks. In classical music, that had never been done before. Millions of people worldwide were impacted. Australia immediately followed. A fairy tale came true for over 38,000 spectators in a Melbourne stadium. There were also 8 of the top 10 DVDs in the nation. All of them belonged to him. He was in close proximity to well-known individuals like Pink and AC/DC. There were still some people who disapproved of his actions despite all of his achievements. The traditionalists were the ones who retreated. To Rieu's audiences, however, it meant everything, despite one director's scathing remarks about musical pornography, mocking lights and gowns, sneering that joy had no place in art. There was a stage for grandparents who were crying as they danced with their grandchildren. With us, you don't feel the solemn hush that drives people away. He wasn't trying to sell shows, and he meant it. He was bringing hope to others. Behind the brilliant lights, the maestro was having a breakdown despite the packed stadiums. When a new issue arose in 2010, he was at the peak of his abilities. He contracted a virus that damaged his inner ear. Being balanced is crucial for violinists. His entire universe trembled. They canceled the tours. There were no performances. It wasn't only illness. The most fascinating individual had to say, "I can do," before he could say, "I can't." It wasn't until it manifested that he realized he was injured. It wasn't only illness, to be precise. It was the point at when a story collapsed, manifesting as a blurry reflection, an unsteady equilibrium. A virus that invaded André Rieu's auditory nerve caused his death in 2010 at the age of 62. An inner ear attack that caused him to constantly lose his mind. Nothing seemed steady, not even the floor underneath him. And the room was whirling. His eyes were disoriented as he stared at the cruelly whirling walls while he lay in bed. It seemed as though the man who had never moved had nowhere to go. Physicians advised rest. The man, once as rigid as a brick block, and the tour plan both collapsed like cheap sheet music. It took André a long time to recover. Every kind of conventional treatment failed. Next came a letter from an Australian fan. He provided exercises that helped him regain his balance and wrote about his personal experience with the same illness. André followed the person's instructions out of desperation. With time, the warping gradually halted. Months of retreating, he rose once more. Unsteady at first, then steady. After a while, he returned to the stage and led a tour that was a musical and a return to fame. No wound, mental or physical, goes away entirely when he heals. Everyone believed that he had returned to his true self. He no longer felt lightheaded, but his equilibrium remained unsteady. Although management acknowledged that the injured ear was still a weak place in 2012, they swiftly claimed any imbalance issues had returned. Additionally, he could become ill again, which would put him in serious risk, particularly if he was performing. Then there came the December 2016 tour stop in Leeds. The bell of despair rang once more. André had a very special place in his heart for a friend. He accompanied us every time. He was a trombone player named Roer Merks. They realized that while everyone else was occupied with other things, he had passed away while they were sleeping. That was like a huge explosion in André's world. In the middle of the tour, he abruptly called off the Nottingham show and he went on to cancel the other shows in Glasgow, Birmingham, and London. It wasn't illness. It was an irrepressible melancholy that has passed. Later, he claimed to feel like a brother. The orchestra, like a family, shed tears of sorrow. André was reminded of what had been absent from his life when the music performances returned. Despite everything, he remained resilient. And he entered the stage in 2019, despite having a horrible sickness that caused him to perspire and have a temperature that would not go away. People who knew him well could see that his smile was causing him to struggle with himself, even though he maintained it on stage. The stage that would shatter him then arrived. He had to perform at 6 sold-out gigs in Mexico City in March 2024. The win appeared to be good. Sharpness shifted to crisis shortly after the second show. Jet lag, altitude, and the virus combined like storm clouds. He was reported to have stumbled backstage, having a fever and having trouble breathing. Silently, he grabbed the phone and dialed Marjorie. 4 nights concluded with the statement, "This is the last time I want a first concert day to be like this." More than 40,000 ticket holders were furious. In the middle of their journey, the 125 members of the orchestra were returned home. Tickets were returned and flights were rescheduled. They were unable to maintain their modest reverence in the midst of the emergency chaos. During that pause, something new happened. His son Pierre came forward. He was more than a tour manager, or a son now. Then he became a shield. There won't be any more ocean races. The speed decreased. Europe-only performances, rigorous timetables, recuperation and rest, and a soft fortress centered on André's well-being. It was not a vacation trip. It was the correct thing to do. However, they wouldn't have had to cope with what was about to happen if it had been taken a bit sooner. Pierre, who had previously been in charge of logistics but was now in control of pace, was now the key to everything. Where André would have pushed the automobile forward, he applied brakes. Every journey and occasion was now filtered. He took on the weight so André could resume his musical endeavors without suffering any injuries. "Can he do this without breaking?" he asked. That fall and decision changed everything. It was not a great musician's downfall. Something fresh was beginning. Someone who understood that one had to earn the right to play a note. By being cautious, not by being forceful. He became more memorable and real as a result. The shift was noticeable by the summer of 2024. However, some of the wounds remained visible. Slowing down came at a great cost to 75-year-old André Rieu. The road was the foundation of his life. For decades, he had been constantly moving. The strain was different for every performance now that Pierre had tightened the ropes. For himself as much as the audience, he felt compelled to demonstrate that he was still capable. He returned to MRI, the stage where he was raised, in July of that year. Everyone in the room knew him, and it was the safest location on his schedule. The show immediately sold out, as it always does. Preparation, however, wasn't going as planned behind the scenes. The practice schedule included provisions for medical clearances, oxygen backstage, and rest periods. Previously concentrating on lighting cues and sound balance, his team now collaborates with physicians and physical therapists. The list was affixed to his dressing room wall, but the audience never saw it. He was aware that his body was no longer his silent companion. The list wasn't lengthy, but it was correct. Before the show, drink some water. During the brief encores, avoid shaking hands until your heart rate has stabilized. Pierre adhered to these guidelines with the same seriousness as his father did when demonstrating the tempo. However, the old speed occasionally attempted to prevail, despite the safety nets in place. He performed a longer-than-planned dance in Murrick on the 3rd night, losing himself in the music of the strings. Everyone got up after the music, and for a brief moment, it felt like a long time ago. However, just as in Mexico City, his jersey felt damp and heavy when he exited the stage. What neither of them wanted to speak aloud was expressed in Pierre's expression. They had nearly crossed the remaining line. Changes were made to the art as well as the body. André reduced the volume, in ways that only a skilled ear could detect by shifting a few pieces around. The upbeat songs were less common. The set list began to be dominated by instrumental narrative, slower waltzes, and ballads. Although they were unaware that it was also a plan, fans enjoyed the change. It was a technique to give the impression that they had limitless energy without actually utilizing that much. In between performances, he was at home more than he had been in decades. A practicing area was created out of the 1400 stone streets and yard behind Murrick's house. To maintain his energy for the days he had to play, he practiced alone rather than for hours with the entire group. Friends remarked that he was more willing to say no, that his voice had a softer rhythm, and that he wasn't phoning as late at night. The audience cheered differently when André Rieu returned to the stage following a protracted illness. It was not merely a party. It was pleasant. The king of the waltz has not performed in months. In 2009, he was interrupted in the middle of his tour by a sickness. André will never give up music, despite the doctor's warning that pushing himself too quickly could ruin his career. The first show took place in Antwerp. All the tickets were sold out before he became ill. A lot of people expected the show to be shorter. Rieu did not cut any of the music for 3 hours. He greeted his audience with the same warmth and friendliness. The attentive observer may still see the changes. He took a seat in the center of the fragments. For the first time in decades, he relaxed, and his son Pierre was viewed as an afterthought throughout the entire performance. As you well know, during his father's illness, Pierre Rieu was in charge of a large portion of the company. He oversaw the schedules, the production, and the choice of whether or not the show would continue. He might now be viewed as the show's safety net. André went on to say that Pierre had explicit instructions to assist him in the event that he became lightheaded. There was a lot of responsibility. It was more than music. It has to do with his father's health. Fans continued to discuss about a notable incident that occurred during the 2010 tour. André paused during the Marie Encore and beckoned Pierre to the front of the stage. Pierre unwillingly took the stage, to cheers from the audience. André handed him a microphone and instructed him to join the musicians in singing. The fact that Pierre wasn't a professional vocalist didn't bother anyone. Many were able to witness a unique glimpse into their intimate bond. The video clip, which revealed a side of André that wasn't frequently shown in talks, soon went viral online. The father, not the music instructor. Things were still going pretty fast behind the scenes. Plans needed to be carefully considered for André's recuperation, but there wasn't much time for rest because of the journey. Brazil was quite hot. Jet lag was awful in Australia. In order to put the hardest songs at the start of the show, when André was at his most active, the individuals who work with him adjusted the set lists. Even in those days, there was always a risk. It may be the end of the world again if his disease returned. Pierre's role grew even larger throughout those years. He was not only responsible for the specifics. He developed into a reserved parent who occasionally defied his father's intuition. Pierre and André reportedly argued about slowing down, but André understood that his son's caution was what kept the tour moving forward. Fans began to notice subtle alterations in André's performance style. There was greater audience engagement and more storytelling time in between pieces. Saving electricity wasn't the only goal. André was aware that he wanted his performances to feel more intimate. He wanted everyone to feel as though they were traveling with him. Every victory, every worry, every wonderful moment, every awful moment. By 2012, the actual machine was operational again. The excursions visited other nations once again. Even though he was ill, the shadow of his illness persisted. André talked openly about how it had altered him. He no longer believed that he was invincible. Each performance seemed more like a gift than a commitment. The financial return was outstanding. The revenue from the tours was substantial. The number of DVDs sold increased. The Emmerich showcases have grown to be major cinematic events every year. The success, however, was the result of a never-ending balancing act. They had to keep the guy at the center of it all safe, while still putting on the spectacular display that the spectators desired. Pierre's influence on business decisions was much more evident. Giving the symphony extra time to practice without needing to rush was something he discussed with Seitz. No matter where the show was staged, he insisted that medical personnel be present, and he began preparing for something André hardly ever discussed in public. When he is no longer able to tour in this manner, what will happen? André occasionally dismissed the notion of slowing down, but others who knew him well recognized the warning signs. There was a little more time between the travels, but they were still very big. People had more time to recuperate because of the scheduling. It was a means of staying safe rather than an escape. The requests persisted, though. In 2016, the lineup featured almost 100 artists. He had to conduct an orchestra in multiple countries, travel frequently, and cope with climatic variations, all of which were mentally taxing. The music's brilliance was all that fans could see. They were unaware of their fatigue when the lights went out. Later, during a tour of Europe, there was an incident. It was significant, but not enough to warrant news coverage. During a performance in Vienna, André took longer than normal rests between songs. He approached the stage and Pierre watched. The music continued to play, but the atmosphere changed. Later, André admitted to feeling lightheaded during that performance. They both recalled the show, even though it was done. Therefore, regardless of how cautious they were, there was always a risk. It strengthened Pierre's resolve to honor his pledge to shield his father from the world while concealing his imperfections. André reduced some of the active aspects of the presentation the next year. He assigned extra work to his orchestra members. He encouraged them to play solos and offered them brief gaps so he could rest without disrupting the performance. It was well received. They considered it to be nice. It was André's plan too. However, the modifications did not imply a reversal, of course. The Marique performances set a record for the most attendees in 2019. André was standing on stage, smiling, holding a bow, and many people were singing along. The best way to end a career might have been at that very time, but he wasn't finished, yet. When the epidemic struck in 2020, the play had to halt for the evening. André has never been away from performing for so long as an adult. During that period, he recorded, practiced, and spoke with his players. However, it also became a period of reflection. He was able to experience what life would be like without having to travel constantly thanks to the forced break. He returned to the stage with greater vigor after the restrictions were removed. They were louder, stronger, and more people showed up. Live music had been missing. André didn't tell them how much he missed them. The walks have continued in recent years, but with modifications brought about by lessons learnt from the past. The plans are more carefully considered. The journey has been designed to be as simple as possible. He spends nearly all of his concerts with Pierre. We're still observing and prepared. He's 75 now. He continues to play with the same passion that brought him international fame. However, those who are aware of his past are aware of the significance of every note. Every performance he does is a victory over the disease that nearly prevented him from speaking. André hasn't revealed anything to the public yet, something that might potentially change everything. Recently, a close acquaintance of the band heard André and Pierre discussing the possibility of doing their final, largest ever global tour. No dates have been set as of yet. Although they haven't discussed it much, if it occurs, everything they've created will be put to the test. The relationship between a father and his son, the music, and the power. The question now, more than ever since his return, is not if André can do it, but if he should.